Hi guys, my name is Steven, and today we're going to be talking about how to make a graphical user interface in ROS. This is something I'm very excited about. I've been working on for a while, and I just wanted to share what I've got. So I'm going to go ahead and launch my ROS launch file here from my terminal. It's called GUI.launch, and it's going to bring up this user interface. I've created it using a framework called Kivy. So I have a window. It has a visualization of my robot. I have some buttons down here at the bottom. I can push play and pause. I can turn my arc on and arc off. This is for a welding robot. Here I have some functions you can change. This is some weld settings. I can change my tabs. Here's some weave settings. At the top here I have a drop-down menu for where you can select the program. And these are just different widgets that we will learn how to combine and use. At the bottom, here's a toolbar where I can select which screen. I have an edit screen. I have a jog screen. This is kind of the traditional jog screen where you can jog the robot in Cartesian directions. So basically, what I've done here is use Kivy as a framework, and then whenever I push a button, there's a function that gets called, and that button then publishes a topic. Here's a menu with not much in it yet. This is still under development, but if I go back to run, and I'm just going to quickly look at one of these topics. So if I look at ROS topic echo, this is a topic I've created called run program. And when I push my play and pause button, I can see it publishes true as expected. Alright, so in this tutorial, I will probably show you how to create a button and how to connect that button to a topic. And we will probably also go over how to make labels and a few other simple things. And then later on, I'll have more videos about more of these detailed widgets. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is talk a little bit about what I'm using. So here's the main page for the Kivy Python module, and what this is it's a cross-platform module that can be compiled for, here it says Linux, Windows, Mac, Android, iOS, and Raspberry Pi, so that's pretty much everything you would want. It's free, and it's Python, so it's pretty easy to use. Now Kivy is a little more low level than I wanted, so there is another module that is built on top of Kivy. It is called KivyMD. MD stands for Material Design, and it's loosely based off of, or actually not too loosely, it's based off of Google's design. So here are a few examples. Here, let me go to getting started. So right off the bat, it shows us a simple tutorial on how to create a hello world. Here's a nice button that kind of has the Google app look to it. And so this really just has some nice stuff in it, and that's why I wanted to use it. I kind of wanted to get into app development, and this was kind of a tangent I take in getting it to work with ROS. So I probably won't get into the details, but you can download Kivy. Just make sure that you're using or downloading for the correct version of Python. I'm using Python version 3.6. This is what is necessary for KivyMD. So make sure that for Kivy, you've downloaded a version of at least 3.6 so that you can use this KivyMD. So once you get Kivy and KivyMD downloaded and installed, you can go ahead and begin with some programming. So that's what I'm going to go ahead and get into right now. Okay, so here I've got a very simple node, Python node. The only thing to note here is the first line. I'm bringing in Python 3.6 instead of Python 2.7, which probably would be your default. So make sure you're using 3.6. This is required for KivyMD. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is import the KivyMD package. So from KivyMD.app, and then we're going to import the object md-app. And this is going to give us all the basically access to all the widgets and everything they can do. And then one other thing we're going to import, it's going to be just from Kivy. So we have KivyMD and then we just have Kivy. So we'll see in a little bit what exactly this is, but it's called Builder. We're going to use this basically to store where we'll be creating the style of our user interface. So those are our imports. So the next thing we want to do, well actually probably what I'll do is I've got a ROS core running. I'll go ahead and run that. Okay, so no errors, so we're ready to go on. So we need to create a class. This class is going to inherit from the MD app. I can name this class whatever I want. Basically though, there is a convention to use essentially whatever word you want, but then end it with app. That happens to be the Kivy, kind of Kivy convention there. And then we're going to inherit from MD app, and that is not all caps, sorry about that. Okay, MD app. Okay, so we need to make a few changes on the initialization. So we need to basically redefine the init function. So what I'm doing here basically is what I consider the template. So for every single GUI you make, this is going to be the same. So I wouldn't worry too much about these details. Just do it once, make sure it works, and then you'll always reuse it. So super, and I'm kind of copying here from another screen, so excuse that, because I do not have this memorized. So inputting all the arguments. All right. Okay, so that was basically just the required step. So the next thing that I'm going to do is give myself access to this rosgui.kv file. This file is going to contain everything that has to do with the style and layout of our user interface. And that's kind of just the standard way of doing things in Kivy. I will see more about that here soon. So there's a variable called screen, and I need to tell screen where the file path is to this run_GUI.kv. So this is where the builder that we imported comes in handy. We're going to use builder to load a file. And then I need a file path. So this is the file path from home. So I got home, Steven, and then my workspace, my ROS workspace, so GUI workspace, then my source folder, and then my package name, which is tutorial, and then I've got actually the file name itself, so rosgui.kv. Okay, so this has basically taken over this variable screen and redefined it as this file. So, there's a couple different ways to do this in Kivy. You could basically create the style of your Kivy program right here within the Python. That doesn't seem to be the recommended way to do it. It seems to be recommended to keep everything dealing with your style in a different file with a .kv tag. So that's what we're going to do. And then that's it for the initialization. Then we got one other function to build, and then we'll be ready to start on a user interface. So again, I'm talking through this, but this is not something I have to type every time. I just copy and paste it. I don't really even think about it. So anyways, but here it is. So basically when we build our app, we're going to access this screen variable, and it's going to point towards this file. One thing to note is you can basically add as many of these files if you want. If you had another one, that's how you would add it. All right. So the very last thing we need to do, again, this is also kind of cookie cutter, but we need to call a function from tutorial app class. It's going to be run member function. And this is what's actually going to run our app. So if I push run now, it's going to grab everything in this file, rosgui.kv, which is nothing. and it's going to run it, and hopefully it's just going to create an empty window. So let's make sure this works. Okay, so I have an empty window here that can be resized, and it can be minimized, and it can be closed. So that's pretty good in itself. All right, so now we're finally ready to begin our user interface development. And again, this is what I would consider your template. Do this once, store it somewhere, and then you never really have to rethink about this code. Amazingly, this is all the Python code you got to have to begin with. Once we get to accessing some of the ROS abilities, such as publishing, we'll need to add a little bit to this Python. All right, so what we need to do now is we need to basically figure out how to build our user interface. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the KivyMD website. Probably begin at the home. And you should probably read through these things, get familiar with the getting started. But from, for day-to-day use, mostly what you'll use is these components. So there's lots and lots of different components you can use. These are all considered widgets. So there's a category, for example, for buttons. So if I click on buttons, it's going to show me the different types of buttons I can use. And I can scroll down and just look at some of these buttons and how nice they look, and how little bit of code there is. So we're going to go ahead and use one of these. Actually, let's start with a label. Labels, that's the simplest example. All right, so I want to use a label. So I go down here and I see MD label. So I'm going to grab that, copy it. This will need to go inside of a layout. So layouts we haven't exactly talked about yet, but on these components you'll see some layouts. Here's a float layout. There's a grid layout. There's a box layout. Anyways, my recommendation is to always use the float layout. So we're going to say float layout. There's a little bit of basically notation that you got to learn for building these .kv files. They're essentially their own language. It's loosely based off of Python. I don't know. It's kind of its own thing. Anyways, but like Python, tabs are important. So I've typed float layout, and then this is my root widget. Now I'm ready to include widgets under it. So if you'll remember, I'd copy and pasted this MD label. And the only thing to note is that since it is a child widget of my root widget float layout, it needs to be indented. And so we're just going to change our text here to say hello world. And then we've got horizontal alignment. These are just properties. We'll look at basically how you figure out what properties you have access to. We'll look at that later. But those are kind of the ones shown in their simple example. So let's go ahead and run this. And it says hello world. And when we adjust our screen, we see that it stays nice and centered. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about this float layout. So what float layout does, let's go ahead and look at it. When I'm coding and making user interfaces, I'm constantly going back to these components. All right, so I say that. This isn't actually exactly what we want. So actually, let's go to Kivy. So again, remember that KivyMD is based off of Kivy. And I'm going to type in Kivy float layout. So I know what I want. I just want to maybe show you how to get to it. So float layout. It's going to have a lot of information about how to create widgets from your Python code, but we want to do it basically from our KV language. So if you'll excuse me, we're going to type Kivy, KV language. All right, here's KV language. We see that they're using Builder to load a file, and what I want to do is learn about using the layouts. Okay, you know what? Okay, we're going to find out later. I'm just going to go ahead and show you how to do it. All right, so I need to basically position my label somewhere. To position it, first, I need to give it a size. There's something called size hint. what this means is I've got my size in X dimension and the Y dimension, so they're both 1. So if I did that, my X size would be 0.5, my Y size would be 1. And what this means is this is your size with respect to your total size. So this is your percent. So if I do 0.25, it means your X is going to be 25% of the usable space. So anyway, since this is our only widget, we're going to make it 100% in the X and 100% in the Y. The next thing I need to do is position it. Honestly, what I'm going to do here is just take a quick look at how I do that in my other code. Okay, position hint. So you'll notice that we're using what's called a hint. So size hint, position hint. What this means is it'll make a best effort to put it where you suggest, but if there's other widgets in the way, then it will conform to that. So anyways, position hint, and then my variables are center X and center Y. There are actually some different variables you can put there. Center X, center Y are kind of my go-to. Again, we're using a percent format, so 0.5 means halfway. So this is actually where it was earlier. So let's move the Y. So by default, it was directly in the middle. If I make this 0.8 and maybe this value 0.25 and run it again. Okay, so now my label is 0.25 in the X direction, which is left to right, and then 0.8 in the up and down direction. All right, so let's go ahead and add another widget. So let's go back to components from KivyMD. We're going to add a button because buttons are exciting. Okay, let's go to button. All right, so let's add, we're just going to pick a button. Okay, raised button. Raised button looks good. All right, so I'm still within my float layout. And now I'm going to have an MD raised button. It's important to note that my indentation is correct. So MD raised button is a child of the float layout. And then these two properties are basically the children of MD button, MD raised button. This is a color option down here that's not strictly necessary. And this is the text within the button. So now that we've got that button in there, okay, it says press me and it's down in the bottom left. So the reason it's in the bottom left is that the size hint of my label is 1 in the X and 1 in the Y, so it's trying to take up all the space, and I haven't defined a position for the other button. So essentially what's important is to define the size and the position of each item in your float layout. And this took me a little bit to get used to. Essentially there's different layouts. There's box layouts, grid layouts, and the meaning of size hint and position hint change a little bit when you use the different layouts. I strongly prefer to stick to the float layout. Alright, so I'm going to position this button hopefully in the middle of the screen. So we're going to go 0.5, 0.5. We're going to run it again. Okay, so we notice that the size is 1, 1, so it took up the entire screen. When we're using float layout, these widgets are allowed to go on top of each other. That's why it's called a float layout. So the widgets basically don't conform to each other. If you're using other layouts, they will eventually avoid being right on top of each other, generally speaking. Anyways, I need to make these widgets so that they're not the same size as the screen, the whole window. So I'm going to make each of them smaller. And we're going to see what that does. And honestly, there's a lot of this, basically changing the size, seeing what it looks like, and then going back and changing it again. Still, when I resize my screen, I see that things kind of resize as you would expect. Alright, so since this video got a little longer than I would like, we are going to talk about how to connect a button to a topic in the next video. So please consider subscribing, and thanks for watching.